Welcoming the Summer with River and Mycospawn. The exact date of River and mine's third excursion into the great unknown is hard to trace, but I'm certain it took place during one of the last weekends of our sophomore year of high school. We had investigated the DSL connection well enough for the time being, and River was then naturally curious about the Mycospawn. He wondered how Silicite's Mycospawn differed from the DSL connection and desired to know this more natural experience that could be had. There was a weekend that promised perfect weather and a man who could supply us with decent Mycospawn, someone Rashid had introduced me to. His name was Dante, and he was a mystery to most of us. Somehow, he'd grown up in the same area as us his whole life, but no one had seen him much, and those who had seen him paid little attention. He had been dabbling in the DSL connection and the Mycospawn at least a year or two longer than most people I knew, including myself. He was the only guy we knew at the time who could acquire Mycospawn regularly, which was an exciting prospect. River and I spent that Saturday playing soccer in a local field behind a school, consuming green power and hanging out with the old Sunrise hike crew. Teton planned to have a fire that night, and it would be the perfect place for us to consume some Mycospawn. First, we had to connect with Dante, which prolonged our time at the field as we waited for his text reply. We couldn't have him sell us Mycospawn behind an elementary school. Even we knew that wasn't an A+ idea. It was already kind of a weird thing for a bunch of tie-dye wearing teenagers to be hanging out in a field behind an elementary school on the weekend, but we had hung out there our whole lives and practically owned the place. We finally got the text from Dante instructing us to meet him in his van across the street, parked next to a Subway restaurant next door to the police department. Also, not an ideal location, but to be fair, he parked his van on the side of the Subway furthest away from the police station. We ran across the street and jumped in his big purple van. Dante was soft-spoken, hobbity, and cordial. Sure, he was quite spacey, like one might imagine a frequenter of the great unknown to be, but he worked it out as a presentation of thoughtfulness. The transaction was quick. $40 for a slice, enough Mycospawn to get me and River into unfamiliar realms of thinking, but probably not enough to make us fearful or paranoid beyond control. This was an introduction to the Mycospawn for River, after all, and I wanted to be on a comfortable level with him while he tested the waters. Sure, I'd probably be able to handle it soundly, but I didn't consider back then how all Mycospawn have different genetics, even if only slightly, so I didn't have any real reason to be sure that this amount of this strain wouldn't get me going a bit bonkers. But that's how I was back then in my adolescence, as I understand one tends to be, heroically optimistic, however naively so. After we purchased the Mycospawn, River and I began our walk to Teton's house, where the rest of the crew had already gone. During this walk, we picked a spot that seemed to have the least amount of cars, right before the middle school, and we started to eat bits of the Mycospawn out of the plastic baggies in our pockets. The image is humorous to recollect, the two of us in our different types of tie-dye shirts, mine rainbow and black, and River's light and dark green with an Emily in the Ether Tea Party graphic, walking down the streets stoked on green power consumption and munching down bits of Mycospawn. I wonder how many of our peers drove by us and had themselves a good laugh, as they knew that whatever powers we were dabbling in, we were definitely far out dabbling in something. We made it to Teton's house and jumped on his trampoline for a solid hour. We giggled our asses off like 5-year-olds. Teton brought out these rubber wiggly discs that had blinking lights inside of them, and they became our new mindless obsession. Silicite's seemed to be infantilizing us, but in a respectfully humbling manner. We rediscovered the sheer pleasure of jumping on a trampoline and throwing around rubbery glowing discs. Here we were again, working well with power that forcefully inserts one into realms of the great unknown. But what was so unknown about this? I think another way to understand the great unknown in this case is by renaming it the hidden forgotten. It's not that the joys of jumping on a trampoline and playing with cheap toys were unknown to me, but in my adolescence I'd grown bored of them and discarded their value in my psyche, effectively forgetting, but still maintaining the ability to recover that experience somehow, rediscovering the beauty and miracle of the simplest of worldly pleasures seems to be an agenda of Silocyte's Mycospawn more often than not. We got off the trampoline when it got darker out and sat around a bonfire. Other people came and went, but River and I paid little attention to them as we stared into the fire. I can't speak for what River witnessed, or has ever witnessed for that matter, but I received the strangest of visions in the burning wood. I saw what looked like a miniature wooden reindeer emerging and receding from the fire. The reindeer image was so uncanny that I snapped a picture of it with my shitty track phone. Though pixelated with low resolution, I could still see the reindeer shape in the photo, and successfully showed other people after the image had burned off. Perhaps it was a trick of the fire, but the reindeer encounter had an impact ineffable. River and I had to walk back to my parents' house by a certain time, so we trekked on back and were feeling mostly over the strongest of the Mycospawn sensations. When we passed the middle school, I stared at the gymnasium's outer brick wall and saw the cement lines between the brick rapidly shift into different grid arrangements and sizes, like different levels of pixelation on a screen. The vision came and went like a desert mirage, and as I shifted my gaze to the street, a cop car slowly crept by. I felt mostly calm despite being unable to properly discern what was illusory and what was real in the moment, and the police car passed. River and I made it back to my place in one piece and decided to watch James Cameron's Avatar while we ate Chex Mix. While I was engaged to some degree, I mostly watched the film passively, in part writing it off for its absurdities, regardless of my past enjoyment. Still, I was happy to remain in the great unknown mindset, and was actually more irked by the crunching of River's Chex Mix consumption. It was extremely loud, and I couldn't believe that he wasn't aware of the disturbance. He got defensive when I confronted him about it, and understandably so, because who was I to get up in arms about something so petty as the sound of a Chex Mix crunch? Of course I like my cinema uninterrupted, but we were still communing with the great unknown. And do you think the leaders of that realm appreciate those who whine about the tiniest of inconveniences? I personally don't think they do. That was it for our sophomore school year. It would be me and River's last psychedelic power usage together for a while. Though we kept our green power usage at the usual heights, we were finished with the underclassmen stage of high school, and we saw an unmistakably upward trajectory ahead. It was time for junior year, the time you're still young enough to put off caring about college too much, but old enough to seem far cooler than those in the grades below, a modest celebrity status. First, though, we had the summer to get through.